Welcome, everyone. I'm Scott Melker for Roundtable on the Street. We're here in Nashville, Tennessee for the Bitcoin conference. We're live on X, YouTube, and of course, the Street. I'm joined by Caitlin Long, CEO of Custodia Bank, and one of our industry leaders and experts in Bitcoin, but also in Fed and monetary policy. We're honored to be here with Robert Kennedy, Jr., independent candidate for President of the United States. You took the world by storm last year at this very conference when you laid out your Bitcoin policy, explained your ownership of Bitcoin, and had some bold ideas for the industry. Perhaps you could give us a quick recap of your Bitcoin journey.
First of all, Scott and Caitlin, thanks for having me. It's really good to be back with you guys. And I'm really happy to be here at the Bitcoin conference. I feel very aligned with this movement. I think it's, we all understand that it's a movement, that it's more than about increasing the size of your pile and whoever dies with the most stuff wins. The people who are involved in Bitcoin are almost completely people who are interested in, who are committed to Bitcoin for idealistic reasons, because they're committed to personal freedom, to property rights, to self-sovereignty, to integrity in government, to extracting America from from this destructive war economy, which is completely dependent on fiat currency and the capacity to print huge amounts of money. And so I feel very aligned with Bitcoiners and the kind of, libertarian gestalt that you see, throughout the people who have committed themselves to understanding this phenomena. And so they're people who are inclined toward critical thinking and curiosity and a love of freedom. And I love that about them. My kids were aware of Bitcoin and talked to me about it a little bit, but it wasn't something that, to me, it was just a novelty. And some of them made, little small investments in it. I became interested during the trucker strike in Ottawa. We had Children's Health Defense, which was the organization that I was running at that time, was embedded with the truckers. So we had a newsletter called The Defender, and we were following the trucker strike, and we were following the truckers when they began in Alberta and British Columbia, and then they came across the country to Ottawa to exercise rights that we all take for granted in the United States: the right to petition our government, the right to assemble, the right to free speech. They were protesting some of the mandates that were interfering directly, not only with their personal freedoms, but with their capacity to make a living. And the trucking industry in Canada is very diverse. There's blacks, there's whites, there's Asians, there's all kinds of people. It was subsequently portrayed by the government as kind of a right-wing movement. It was the opposite of that. The strike itself, they all converged on Ottawa. And it really, if you look at the films, the videos, it was like Woodstock. They were people being kind to each other. They were distributing water. They were distributing food. They were cleaning up the garbage, and they were behaving very, very well. They were singing. There were bands. It was a very idealistic outpouring of democratic passion. And the Trudeau administration responded with this kind of, I would call it a totalitarian crackdown that was really Orwellian in its deception and portraying these people as a threat to order, to democracy, to public safety. And they responded by using surveillance tools, including facial recognition systems and satellite surveillance, to figure out to take the license plates of the trucks, to identify the owners of those trucks and then to shut down their bank accounts. And these are people who were never charged with a crime, much less convicted. And all of a sudden they were denied access to their money. And, by coincidence, I had spoken in Milan about a couple of months before, and I had talked about the control of centralized digital currencies and the control of currency by the government, and how dangerous that is, because I have been to China and seen what they're doing over there. And I had warned, about the emergence of vaccine passports and social credit passports that were being proposed at that time and being implemented in Europe, including in Italy. And I said, this is going to be the end of any kind of personal freedoms. And I thought maybe this would come to Europe, and maybe in 100 years, the United States. But here it was 2 or 3 months later. We're seeing it in North America, where government's coming in and saying, if you protest against us, we're going to shut down your bank account. I talked to one of the strikers. They couldn't get gas, diesel for their trucks. They couldn't move their trucks. They couldn't make a living. They couldn't access their bank accounts to pay their mortgages, to buy food for their families. And one of the truckers told me that he was facing prison because he was mandated to make alimony payments and couldn't make them. And it occurred to me then, and it struck me many, many times since, that transactional freedom is as important as freedom of speech. It's something that the framers of the Constitution would have put in the Constitution if there was any conception at that time that the government was going to be able to trace every transaction and to control the money, so that individual access to your own private bank accounts. And here we have a situation where the government didn't like the criticism of government policies, so it shut down your bank account. It made it so that you couldn't pay not only for your food, but your rent. So you're going to be out on the street. There's very, very few people who can withstand that kind of pressure. And it became very clear to me that we have to do something really decisive to ensure that we continue to have transactional freedom in our country. We need to guard it as carefully as we guard the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, the Constitution, the guarantee of freedom of speech.
Interestingly, you'll be keynoting this year as well, and so will former President Donald Trump, who has seemingly captured the hearts and minds of the Bitcoin industry. You laid out all of these policies before, and we've seen echoes of that in the policies that he has proposed. I would love for you to compare and contrast a bit your policies and his, and speak to whether you think that his passion for Bitcoin now is genuine or if it's more political posturing.
Well, I can't look into President Trump's head, so I assume that people mean what they say. But there's some cautionary, I think, evidence. First of all, and I'm very happy, I couldn't be more happy that President Trump is now publicly at least committed to Bitcoin. It's a new issue for him. He has not been committed to it in the past. He's talked about Bitcoin as a scam. And his recent decision, or his recent announcement that he's going to bring Jamie Dimon in to run Treasury, that is not going to drain the swamp. That is the swamp creature. And Jamie Dimon is very close to the Fed. He's not somebody who's going to be interested in dismantling the Fed and disempowering the Fed, which we need to do. We need to stop the Fed from just being a money printing machine. He's somebody who's been very, very hostile to Bitcoin in the past. He's called it a Ponzi scheme. He's called it a scam. And those seem to be very deeply embedded values in him. President Trump also, Steve Mnuchin, who was his former Secretary of the Treasury, also tried to end any kind of person-to-person transactions with Bitcoin. He initiated the war on Bitcoin And so I think we need to be cautious. And then I'm not sure. I'm interested to hear President Trump's speech this weekend, but I'm not sure. And I hope he understands the importance to the Bill of Rights and personal freedoms. President Trump locked down our country. He knew that he shouldn't be doing that. He said he came in and he said he was going to run the country like a business. Instead, he locked down 3.3 million businesses in our country. And because a 50-year bureaucrat who'd never been elected told him he had to do that with no due process, no scientific citation, no just compensation. He then printed, he promised to balance the budget, but he printed $8 trillion with the currency. I think it was more than all the presidents combined from George Washington to George W. Bush. And he amounted as an assault on the United States Constitution. He began censoring speech during his administration. And, I'm litigating on that issue even now. The Biden administration amplified and accelerated that and began using the CIA, the FBI, CICE, DHS to censor Americans on social media and the media. President Trump closed all the churches for a year with no scientific citation. He ended freedom of assembly, which is protected by the First Amendment, with these social distancing regulations that originally he complained about, but somehow he got rolled by a bureaucracy. And that's what I worry about with President Trump, that he will make some commitments and that he will get in there and be rolled by a bureaucracy, by people like Jamie Dimon, who will say to him, well, Bitcoin is a good idea for this fringe group, but we're adults now, and, just between us billionaires, you can't do that. And I worry about his commitment to, these essential principles, that those are enduring, deeply rooted commitments. I hope so. President Trump also had the power for 4 years to pardon Ross Ulbricht, to pardon Edward Snowden, to pardon Julian Assange, and he didn't do it. So again, I think the people that he tends to listen to are people who are deeply embedded in these intelligence agencies, in the Fed bureaucracies, and in the war machine, in the money printing industry. And I'm worried about his capacity to exercise independent judgments, and to really get to study these issues in ways that you can make a deep personal commitment to it, that gives you the capacity to stand up to very, very convincing, very persuasive, very powerful bureaucracies.
When he talks about the money printing industry and talking about the Fed, and I don't think the average American has any clue how money is created in this country, who has the power to do that, and where the incentives lie with printing money.
So Caitlin knows better than anybody.
We've even heard that the Fed may not be constitutional.
I think there's a court case that may very well challenge that because it's my company's court case. The Federal Reserve, to your point, and to the point that you just made, printed the money to enable the increase in debt of $8 trillion. That wasn't all bought by people's hard-earned savings financing the U.S. government. A big chunk of that was money that was printed. And the question is, who gave the authority to create that money? And to your point, Scott, very few people understand how money works. I've worked on Wall Street for many years. Frankly, very few people on Wall Street even understand the plumbing of how money works. Yeah. And you've pointed out that the budget should be balanced, and yet to the extent that Congress wants to keep spending and the Fed will just keep printing money, that literally is power that was rested to the people in the U.S. Constitution, but Congress gave it to the Fed and specifically to the private banking industry in 1913. to your point, the banking industry, actually, there are 12 different regional Federal Reserve banks with a federal agency on top. Those 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, those Reserve Bank presidents, are appointed by the banking industry. And they're the ones who make the decisions and vote. They have votes on the Federal Open Market Committee. They vote on interest rates. They vote on quantitative easing and the sorts of programs that create money out of thin air to finance the budget deficits. Would you continue that program were you president?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I think my uncle tried to do this in 1963 with the silver certificates. He understood that the capacity to print unlimited federal currency is ultimately a formula for the destruction of our country. And unfortunately, you have this very, I would call the relationship between Congress and the Fed as both parasitical to our country, and it's a symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
They're helping each other. So they both have short-term gains. And it's a private bank. The Fed is not a public institution. It's more akin to a private bank. And as you say, the decision makers are appointed by the banking industry. And its function with these cycles of quantitative easing, followed by high interest rates, act like a sump pump in your swimming pool that is, pumping all the cash out of the strip mining cash and equity from the American middle class and pumping it upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires. And the coup de grace was the lockdowns during COVID, which shut down all the small business in this country, which is what we should be nurturing.
Right.
And kept open the Walmarts and the Amazons and Facebook and the big the oil industry and the processed food industries and big ag, and they all flourished during that period. And meanwhile, Main Street just got liquidated. And the guys who I spent most of my life in small towns, mm-hmm. and I raised my kids in Mount Kisco, New York. There was a local sporting goods store there that would give my kids summer jobs. And when you go into that store, there's a plaque on the wall for the boys of thank gratitude for the Boy Scouts. And for the Little League, this guy was paying local taxes that benefited my community. He was employing our kids during the summer. He was paying for my kids' hockey jerseys. He was paying for their Little League uniforms. And the money, you spent a little extra money when you went in there than you'd pay a Walmart or Amazon. But that money was staying in our community and recycling and enriching all of our lives. And now Amazon doesn't pay taxes in our community. In fact, last year, Amazon didn't pay any taxes, didn't pay a dime in federal taxes. So you have this very parasitical relationship that is designed to pump money upward. And during COVID, there was a $4.3 trillion shift in wealth from the American middle class to the super rich. And we now have a situation where the top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the entire middle class, 60% of our country. And that's not healthy. That is not an economic configuration that is stable enough to support a democracy. You can't have a sustainable democracy, with this huge gap between rich and poor. And that is the purpose of the Fed. The Fed is designed to enrich the bankers, enrich the top classes while impoverishing the rest of us and treating everything, commoditizing our landscapes, our children, our health, our bank accounts, turning us all into consumers and commodities. And the Fed is the mechanism through which that is done. So I think we have to, what I'll do as president is I'm going to enjoy consulting with you and maybe making you in charge of that. But I know what we need. We need sovereignty. We need to reestablish sovereignty over the Fed. And we need to reestablish complete transparency. So everybody knows what's happening. There are predictable ways that decisions are being made, and that they're not being made to benefit the banking industry, but they're being made to benefit the American public. And, you know, we got to start by assuming that we have a balanced budget every year. And we need to do the kind of cuts, you know, we need to cut our military budget in half. And guess what? If we cut it in half today, it would be at the same rate in 2024 dollars, the same amount of budget as we were at the height of the Cold War. So, you know, the height of the Cold War, why do we need more money now in the military than we did at the height of the Cold War? We don't. And the extra money, that extra $450 billion is not being spent for national defense. It's being spent for global domination. And that's actually making America a lot weaker. We also need to end the chronic disease epidemic, which is our biggest expenditure. That's $4.3 trillion. That's 5 times our military budget. We can end that overnight, and we will save huge amounts of money. And then we need to start reinvesting in making investments that actually enlarge our GDP. Because we can't cut ourselves completely out of this $34 trillion deficit. We actually need to grow our way out of it. And we can do that. 2 of the ways we're going to do that is we're bringing AI home back to America and making us the global hub. AI is very, very tricky because, of course, it can be used by the government to enslave us, to distort our reality, to control everything. But it also could be used by the people to make government more of a servant, to make it more transparent, more responsive, and that's what we need to do. But we need to bring it home. We need to carefully regulate it at home, not over-regulate it to drive it abroad. We need to make agreements with countries we now consider enemies, like Iran, Russia, and China. We all have to collaborate, or it's going to kill us. And we need to bring that back to the United States, and we need to bring blockchain back to the United States. And we bring blockchain here, bring all those entrepreneurial energies, all the capital. In the last 2 years, there's been about over 1,200 new cryptos launched just in Switzerland. The capitalization of those products is over $360 billion. So it's $1/3 trillion. That should be happening here.
Correct. Not
in Switzerland. And the same thing's happening in Singapore and Dubai and the Emirates and all over the world. And we're driving crypto out. We're driving blockchain out. It is the industry of the future. We got out of the last debt crisis because Silicon Valley came and rescued us. Because we had a new industry in this country that grew our GDP. And right now, we cannot cut our way out of debt. We need to do a lot of cutting. We also need new industries that can grow our way and make the debt proportionally smaller.
I don't think people are also aware of how fast that debt is growing. It's arguably the largest problem that we have. $1 trillion roughly every 100 days now.
90 days, $1 trillion.
Yeah, talk about
it's $34 trillion. The cost of servicing that debt is now greater than our military budget. Within 5 years, and this is without a big hike in interest rates, which will accelerate the whole process. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. So clearly that's not sustainable. And President Trump broke every record, running up $8 trillion. President Biden, by the time he leaves office, will have beat that record. And it's insane. And neither of these presidents, I believe, are capable of ending it.
Do you need a balanced budget constitutional amendment?
I would not. There's a lot of constitutional amendments that I would pass if it was an easy thing to do. It isn't. It's
By design.
Yeah, and it opens up a can of worms for on a whole lot of other issues. So that's probably, and I try to be very realistic about what I can accomplish and what I promise. I try to align those two things. I never promise anything that I need legislation to accomplish because I'm not confident that Congress is able to act on anything. And a constitutional amendment is even harder because you need to get all the states on board. And the president doesn't have much power to do that. So what I would, that's not the course. That would be evading responsibility for me to say that's the only answer. As president, I'm going to take responsibility for balancing the budget. And, I have a plan for doing that. And that's what I'm going to do.
Well, if the power to print money were wrested back to the people, it would be a little easier for the US president not to have to be forced into these huge deficits that Congress, without any tether on their spending, is facing. And that's one of the challenges with the system that has evolved in the United States, is that Congress hasn't had to have any discipline because there hasn't been a problem financing the deficit when the largest money printer in the world can just buy US treasuries and create the money out of thin air. And folks are wondering why a meal at McDonald's costs $15, $20 now.
Yeah, mortgages are now double what they were 4 years ago. And if you earned $1,000 10 years ago, that's worth $520 a day. And I watch, I'm at people's kitchen tables every day talking to them about what's actually, how it impacts them. I talked to a guy this morning who is in Hawaii where he bought a dozen eggs and it cost $12, $1 an egg, right? And Hawaii is, the most expensive food in the country, but we're seeing these extraordinary hikes in $6 bread, $6 milk, $6 gasoline, and Americans can't afford it. People are having to make choices now that are heartbreaking. I run into elderly people that are cutting up their pills to make them last the week. People who are choosing between food and gasoline. People who watch. Over half the people in this country can't put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. And if you're in that cohort and you see the engine light come on in your car, it's the apocalypse. You're not going to be able to pay the mechanic.
Right.
You're going to lose transportation. You're not going to be able to make it to work. You're not going to be able to pay your rent. You're going to end up homeless. And this is happening all over the country. One of the things, Caitlin, you talked about is putting this in the power of the people. Well, even in my lifetime, I've watched how the whole system has been distorted to allow them just to print money. When we were kids and they wanted, if we were going to go to war, let's say during World War II, you were going to go, the country went to war. They either had to go to the public and say, we're going to raise taxes to pay for this war. And the public in World War II supported that. They wouldn't have supported for Vietnam. They wouldn't have supported for Iraq. They would not have supported for Ukraine. Or they had to do something else. They had to sell war bonds, which was another way of getting the public to pay the cost of war. But they had to be straight about it.
Correct.
They had to say, here's a bond. We want you to do it for patriotic reasons. And you were betting. Everybody had skin in the game. And now they don't have to do that at all. All they do is they don't even declare war. They just say, we're going to spend $200 billion on a war with Russia, but we're going to get Ukraine to bring the war. We're going to kill 600,000 of their kids. And a war we can't win. And we're going to kill 600,000 of their wars. We're going to be able to sell all of our weapons to Ukraine because that's the deal. And so, BlackRock owns Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed, all of the military contractors. They're making the money on the war. They have the contract for rebuilding Ukraine. They're going to make another $500 billion on that. And they're the big donor to the Democrat and Republican Party, and this whole thing is fixed and it's rigged, and they don't even have to come to us and say we're going to have another one of these wars. They just print the money. And, BlackRock, Larry Fink is buddies with the Fed, and it's all a very, very incestuous and corrupt problem. Bitcoin is not only an off-ramp to this inflationary highway, which is the highway to hell, but it also is a way of restoring integrity to our government. It's a way of restoring personal freedoms. It's a way of the middle class can insulate itself from inflation, which is just a form of government theft.
To that end, would you be willing to add Bitcoin to the balance sheet?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually do a kind of a basket of hard currencies, of maybe platinum and gold and other hard currencies, and begin issuing at least a class of treasury bills that are anchored to hard currency, let's say the first year by 1%, and then maybe the next year by 2%, and to watch how that goes, because that will inject a discipline into the product and ultimately get up to 100%. I would like to have the federal government begin to buy Bitcoin, and to over my term of office, ultimately have an equivalent amount of Bitcoin that we have gold, because Bitcoin is an honest currency. It's a currency that's based upon proof of work, and everything's on the ledger, and it's decentralized, and that's what we need to do with democracy. If we want to save our democracy, we need to decentralize, and Bitcoin is honest because there's nobody in charge, and it's it is the template for that vision of decentralization and for personal sovereignty, personal control, and personal freedom.
Well, the antithesis of what you just described is everybody's greatest fear, which is a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. You talked about social credits in China. We know that over 100 countries in the world are actually doing pilot tests with central bank digital currencies. People fear that it would be a violation of their freedoms, their privacy. The government would know exactly what you did with your money and when, to take your taxes directly out, decide what you spend on. How would you protect us against that?
It'll also give the government the power to control you, absolutely, because digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, are programmable. So you're using a plastic. In China, they actually use their faces as the credit card, and you have a social credit score. So if you do something, if you criticize your government, or you're not wearing a mask, you're wearing it below your nose on a mask day, or you get too close to your girlfriend on a social distancing day, and you're observed by the facial recognition systems, which are ubiquitous in China, then they deduct that from your social credit score. And then when your score drops below a certain level, your currency begins to program. So your currency may say, "Oh, you've been bad, and therefore we don't want you to travel. You're under kind of house arrest, and your credit card, which is your face, is only going to work, let's say, hypothetically, in grocery stores that are within a certain radius of your home, a walking distance of your home. You can't buy gas with it. You can't buy an airplane ticket. You can't buy any luxury items, or you can only, it allow you to live."
Terrifying.
And you imagine if the government had the power to do that, and we know they'll use it. Anytime you give them a government power, ultimately it will abuse that power to the maximum extent possible. And we saw that during COVID, and we could never let it happen again.
The average person has no idea probably that happened, and yet there's deep anger out there. There's a sense that the system is rigged. There's a sense that something is wrong, that they're not being told the truth. And that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin. I love that you described it as an honest ledger. It's the same way as the old gold standard. There was nothing special about gold. It just tethered the ledger to honesty. And the dollar being tethered to gold meant that the government couldn't outspend its means. And back then we had a fairer system, to your point. There wasn't as much inflation. People could afford to buy a home. People weren't forced into having both the parents working just to make ends meet and still having trouble making ends meet. The system evolved into something very unfair and
predictably. And of course, the beauty of gold is that it has proof of work. Right? If somebody has gold, they've gone to some enormous expenditure of energy to get it, you know, and we know what the value of that is. And gold reflected that value, the value of that work, and the same as, you know, Bitcoin is such a unique invention, and it was intended to reproduce the intrinsic value of gold, but Satoshi intended it to do that and to be limited, and the same way that, you know, the supply of gold throughout the world is finite, but it's also infinite. It has an advantage over gold of being infinitely divisible, and so it's really kind of the ideal currency, but it's also, like, you know, which everybody understands now who is committed to this. 60 million people are buying, Americans who are buying Bitcoin are understand that there's a real link to ending government corruption, to property rights, to personal freedoms, to self-sovereignty, to decentralization, all the things that we care about if we want to be an exemplary democracy. Bitcoin grounds us in those things. And, you know, to me, it's so elegant and it's so beautiful. And that's why I put my personal, a lot of my personal net worth is now in Bitcoin because I just love the beauty of it.
Well, as the stream is titled, I think that makes you the real Bitcoin candidate.
Well, again, you believe in the philosophy of Bitcoin. It's not about numbers going up and flipping your view from negative to positive. Once you dug in, it was very clear that you were one of us. You found your tribe here, and we're really grateful to have you back.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kennedy. Caitlin, of course, this has been really eye-opening, and we hope that the industry continues to support you. We thank you so much for what you've done for our industry and your deep conviction that you described, and look forward to how it evolves.
Scott, thank you. Caitlin, thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Thank you.
I luckily had the clock right behind him and somebody waving. I was zoned down. 6:02. I think